down the hall. We want to acknowledge that we're here, we're at the 1-year anniversary. Just a couple days out. I'm coming in with all kind of feelings. So thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. This is one small piece to play. I think everybody has a role to play in recovery, but no one person can do everything. So we're really grateful that so many people here and online are taking time to learn how they can help the land, because we've all had a lot of different experiences this year and are coming into this week. A lot of different feelings and perspectives, but what unites everyone in this room and online is our desire to care for the land. And we're so grateful that you're spending that time with us. I hope that you are signed up for the rest of the series or know about the rest of the series. Each one of these topics is, again, another small thing that we can all do to help all our communities, wild and otherwise, bounce back.
Thank you, Jen. I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to Luke. So Luke got his start into horticulture by growing up on his small family farm in Western North Carolina and selling plants at local farmers markets with his grandparents. Luke continued this passion by obtaining his associate's degree in horticultural technology at the Blue Ridge Community College, and then his undergraduate and master's degree in the Horticulture Science Department at NC State. Luke has a diverse set of work experience in the industry, from ornamental breeding to hemp production, as well as greenhouse and arboricultural experience. In his current role, he works here in this office space along with soil and water with NC Cooperative Extension. He coordinates a wide variety of educational programming, as well as interacting with our local growers and green industry professionals as the commercial horticultural agent for Buncombe County. I will say as his office neighbor that one thing I can say personally is that Luke really cares. He wants the people he talks to on the phone to be successful and to feel heard and cared for. And I'm just delighted that I get to listen in on some of those conversations. He also does the same for us staff whenever we have a question. He's just such a wealth of knowledge. And so I hope that beyond the presentation tonight, if you have other questions, that you'll reach out to Luke, because he's a very caring and smart man. So I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, so guys, I'm so excited that you're here to spend an evening talking about a subject in invasive plant control that, quite frankly, like an hour and a half isn't really going to touch it, but we're going to do our best to give you some tools that you can take, and hopefully you feel like you're going to be in a little bit better of a spot coming up with a game plan on some very challenging plant material in light of challenging circumstances that we're all facing as a community, and one of those challenges being invasive plants. And so really the objectives of today's talk, we're going to talk about obviously the impacts of invasive plants, which many of us are familiar with them, right? Because we have them in our landscapes and our ecosystems. We're going to identify those common invasives that we're concerned about, especially in light of Helene impacts. And how we can really develop a good, realistic plan to address those challenges. So what is an invasive plant? I feel like it's important to kind of define what that is, because there is a lot of definitions that float out there, and there is a definition as defined by actually the United States, the federal government has a definition, which is what this is. So there's 2 criteria that a plant has to fill in order to be considered invasive. It has to be non-native or alien to the ecosystem in question, and then it has to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Okay, so it has to fill both of those criteria to be considered invasive. If it's simply non-native, but it doesn't displace things environmentally, or it doesn't cause economic or human health harm, it's not considered to be an invasive, it's considered to be non-native. Okay, so that's kind of the main difference there. So plants become invasive, they're successful, and why is that the case? Why do we see invasive plants become so successful? Well, if you look at where the majority of our invasive plants are from, they are from similar climates in other parts of the world, right? So they're brought here through various means. We're going to talk about some of those means today. But that's really why they're so well adapted to our region, because again, the resources and the environment, you think about water, temperature, our hardiness zones, what our winters are like, those are all factors that kind of lead into how well an invasive plant or any plant is adapted to a particular environment. And invasives are usually adapted to a wide range of environments, which makes them challenging. So again, originate from similar climates, they're very well adapted. And then, of course, with invasive plants, many of them, the pests and pathogens that kind of keep those plants in check in their native environment, they're not here, right? So the pests that would ordinarily feed on, say, kudzu, being the kudzu bug, we do actually have the kudzu bug here, but not at the levels at which they regulate kudzu, right, in our just traditional climate that we have. So again, pests and pathogens that would keep those in check are not here, and they thrive in disturbed soils and environments, right? We've just seen some events that, again, have created a very hospitable environment for invasive plant establishment. They reproduce and spread rapidly by seed and roots. So most of the time they have multiple forms of reproduction, which is something that we have to consider when we're talking about management plans in a moment. They're distributed by birds or wildlife, right? Not just birds, but many different kinds of mammals, rodents that can carry and disperse seed sources around our ecosystems. Wind, humans, water. There's so many ways that invasive plants can be spread, but really I think the number one way invasives are spread is by us, via humans. You'll come to find that many of the invasive plants that we deal with in our ecosystems were brought here originally for a purpose and have a lot of unintentional consequences. Some of those purposes being ornamental. I think I have heard someone come in and say, why are the invasive plants are always beautiful, right? They have beautiful blooms, beautiful foliage color, great habit, right? They can occupy area very quickly, get established, they don't need much, right? So they were brought here to fill a purpose in our yards, but then again, unintentional consequences mean, displacing our native vegetation, and again, doing human health harm and economic harm, and we'll talk about some of those too. Oh, importantly too, I think it's worth mentioning that equipment, soil, buying and sharing the plants, those are kind of more of those common methods that again, humans have assisted invasive plants in getting established. And it's one thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're purchasing plants is to make sure that you're not creating a problem for yourself in the long run. And if you need resources like invasive plant lists and other things, we're going to go over some of that today as well. And of course, chemicals and invasives can inhibit growth of plants nearby. Microstegium or Japanese stiltgrass is one of those that we're going to talk about tonight. And it actually does have some processes that literally enable it to deter growth of other things surrounding it to give itself a leg up on the competition. So not only is the deck stacked in terms of all of those things that, a plant needs to thrive, nutrients, water, light, many of these plants are adaptable to, again, a wide range of those habitats, but they also have mechanisms that they've evolved to displace other competition, which again makes them much more of a threat to our native ecosystems and environment. Again, roots can run long distances and smother nearby plants. Again, one of those other natural adaptations that invasive plants have, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. So again, to summarize what we just talked about, invasive plants are opportunistic, they're adaptable, and they're competitive. And those are the three main reasons why we see problems again in our ecosystems and landscape. So let's talk about some of those impacts, kind of on a broad scale. And of course, you can apply these impacts on your gardens and landscape and your property, right? So forest invasive plants environmentally compete for moisture, sunlight, nutrients, and space, right? With all of our other native flora and fauna. And so when they take the place of those plants, it's decreasing the overall plant diversity. And that has a lot of wide-ranging impacts in our food webs and ecosystems. Think about all of those intricacies with insects having evolved specific relationships with particular plants as a food source or as a means of reproduction. They lay their eggs on a particular native plant, and when that invasive plant comes along and displaces on a broader scale a lot of our native plants, that creates challenges for our insect friends and some of our other animal. So again, that degradation of wildlife habitat includes also agricultural lands. So in terms of our food security and the amount of inputs needed to get food on our tables, invasive plants and weeds that are a challenge to treat is something that directly impacts our food supply as well. Water quality along our riverways and streams is definitely impacted by invasive plants. We've talked about plant and our native plants and their impacts in our aquatic ecosystems can't be overstated. If you think about many of our streams, for example, in our areas as being trout streams, that require shade to provide certain levels of dissolved oxygen in our waterways to support all of these creatures. Many of our invasive plants don't provide the canopy and the structures needed to support these wildlife. And so again, the ramifications are often spread beyond what we may even tend to think about, okay? So it's important to think about that. Recreational opportunities, of course, will be impacted, as well as just soil stability. Many of our invasive plants establish themselves very quickly, but if you think about the depth at which their root systems are, say a native willow that has a very deep root system that can hold, large amounts of soil. If you replace that with Japanese knotweed, while Japanese knotweed can hold superficial amounts of soil together, some of these other native plant material do a much better job of just holding it overall, okay? So that's important to think about too. So again, we've all seen the impacts, right, of invasive plants and how they can change ecosystem function. I always like to ask people, so who can tell me what this plant is here? Because, right? So how can anyone tell me, given all the optimal environment conditions, so right amount of sunlight, nutrients, water, in the active growing season, how much growth can kudzu put on in a single day? In a single day, one day.
1 foot?
2 feet? Over a foot. Over a foot. Yep. So it's something that, again, when you're thinking about how tenacious these plants are, it doesn't take long before you start seeing situations like this, what that impact not only the ecosystem value, but the property value and what you're able to do in managing that piece of property. It can be done, right? So we've talked about some of the bad stuff. Let's talk about what we can do about the problem. So it always starts in your backyard and in your neighborhood. So you being here is obviously the first step in getting some good control. Of course, there's going to be plants that the first place to start is to not plant certain plants in the landscape. So we talked about that. Many of our invasives were at one time ornamental plants that were offered in the trade, and there's still invasives that are offered in the trade today. So it's important that you are aware of what those plants are, so that way we can avoid those. And again, prevent future problems down the road. So some of those here that are still, you can see them in the ornamental tray today, Bradford or Calorie pear. Interestingly enough, you can still find those. Privet, both Chinese and Japanese privet are both found in the tray today. English ivy as well as Chinese silvergrass are all invasives that you can still find in the trade. And there are others out there too, right? So there are many resources with different lists that we're going to talk about. And so that would become important as well.
I'd like to add with silvergrass in particular, I've seen people, they're offering a sterile silvergrass. And what's typically around 90% sterile. And when something produces tens of thousands of seeds, 10%, even 1%, even if it was 99% sterile, doesn't take much to see it go down your street. So take those labels with a grain of salt.
Right, yeah, and so many of these, actually, some of these invasives, and for example, Bradford pear, when it was released in the ornamental trade, it was released as a sterile variety. And it was true, it was sterile. It wouldn't outcross with other pears or apples, wouldn't outcross at all. But what they didn't realize was that it could outcross with itself given the right amount of time, enough generations, and it would outcross with itself. And so, again, it was one of those situations where we were promised that it was going to be, sterile, and then it wasn't. So the mechanism of which sterility, is accomplished can directly impact whether a plant is invasive. For example, seedless watermelon. I always use that example. Well, how do we generate more seedless watermelon? They're not going around and they're not making a bunch of cuttings. They're actually generating triploids by making a cross between, they basically double the genome for the geeks out there. They double the genome, so they have 4 sets of genes instead of the normal 2. So they double that, and so they cross one that's doubled with one that's normal, and they result in a triploid that has 3 sets. Well, come to find out, a plant that has 3 sets cannot outproduce. Think about like a mule. If you go back to your biology class, mules can't reproduce, right? It's the same with plants. So that's how we generate a lot like seedless watermelon. It's through that same method. And so there's ways to get around it and provide that sterility. But again, if you just market it as being sterile without having done that genetic work, you get into trouble, for sure. Tree cut and remove, right? So that's something, a strategy we're definitely going to talk about. So before seed development or when seeds are not present, it's going to be important to go ahead and try and get rid of that plant. If you let it go to seed, oftentimes these invasive plants can stay in the seed bank for very long periods of time. So the first strategy in any kind of fighting with invasive plants is know when it sets seed and try to control it before that happens, okay? Bag and dispose of the fruit and cut vines away from trees because again, vines, the impact that vines can have on tree health can be overstated as well. So to protect, again, other plants in the landscape, cut those vines away from trees. It's going to be really important. Grasses, when you're going through areas, especially of Japanese silkgrass this time of year, where it has a lot of mature seeds on it as well. So this is what Japanese silkgrass looks like. In fact, these flower structures have already went to seed. And what I always tell folks with Japanese silkgrass, the flowers, yes, they mature in late August and September, but they start initializing seed in July. So if you can go ahead and cut it in July, well before the time in which those seeds ripen, that's really the ideal time to mow Japanese silkgrass and then follow it up with a good herbicide treatment or look at some of the other mechanical forms of control. We'll talk about that. But importantly, if you walk through areas where you have these invasive grasses, it's important to clean your shoes, prevent that cross-contamination and movement of those seeds from one side to another. They can hitch around on your clothes, on your dog, right, when you're walking your dog, tires, equipment. So again, be mindful of that when you're leaving infested areas, that you're not spreading that problem to you or to one of your neighbors. Encourage or work with your neighbors on adjacent properties. That's going to be important, but it's not always possible. I understand relationship dynamics with your neighbor could get complicated, right? But again, if your neighbor has an invasive and it's coming on your property, I mean, it's kind of a never-ending battle, right? So if you can get that cooperation, you're going to achieve a much higher level of success and not have to be fighting in a never-ending battle. And again, that may not be possible, but if it is possible, please work with your neighbors, because that's going to make the process a lot more simple and easier and enjoyable, I'm sure. So identification is really the name of the game when it comes to managing invasive plants. I know we talked about IPM. I didn't really explain IPM. I should have done that at the beginning. IPM is Integrated Pest Management. And really what it's all about is using the tools that we have in our toolbox to make the best decision based on your personal goals and your situation. That includes the monetary resources that you have available to you, the time that you can spend, right? Addressing an invasive plant concern, and then using tools culturally, mechanically, and chemically as a last resort to address those problems. But the first step is always going to be identification. If we don't know what we're working with or what we're up against, we don't know the best strategy to find. And so these are some really good resources to help you as you're trying to identify your invasive plants. You are, of course, always welcome to contact our Buncombe County Extension Master Gardener helpline. That is one of the best ways to be able to identify a sample. You can bring it into our office right here, and we can assist you in identifying what that plan is and talk about various management strategies with you. There, of course, is some other really good resources as well, and we'll talk about some of those here. This is an example of one of the apps that's available, and then as well as if you have a smartphone, you know, Apple iPhones actually have the ability now, and the accuracy can be hit or miss, right? But it's a way that you can narrow down what those options are. You may only be able to narrow it down to a particular family, but that's going to help you, right? And then reach out to an expert or to someone who knows about those plants to confirm confirm the diagnosis. But there's many apps out there. Picture this as one of the more popular ones. And then of course, iNaturalist is a really good resource that I always like to tell folks about. Because as people notice invasive plants, if you sign up and it's free to populate iNaturalist, not just with plants, but with insects and other things. If you have an interest and you'd like to see the distribution of that particular species of plant or insect, you can get on iNaturalist and see where people have observed it in your region. Okay, so that's something, another really good resource to have. The Invasive Plant Atlas is another great resource, and I'm not going to talk about it at great length, but I would encourage you to get on here. It gives you a lot of really good pictures, as well as some other resources for control too. So at this point, I'd like to stop, because I know I've been talking for a few minutes. Are there any questions just from the get-go here? Yes.
Are you going to go into depth on identification?
Absolutely, yes. Yep, and that's why I've got like a bunch of these plants up here, because we're gonna be able to touch and feel and hopefully get outside if there's no time. Yep. Good question.
So if we have that still grass at this point, is it pointless trying to do anything with it?
No, you can definitely
You'll
get some
pull
good
it?
control. Yeah, it depends on the size and the scope of the problem. I actually have a slide about Japanese silkgrass, so we're gonna go into some of those management specifics too on some of the species. Yeah.
You know, I think you had silvergrass up there.
Mhm.
Is that this campus?
Yes. Yep. Yep, this campus. And that's one that's like lining the sides of the interstate, like I-26 and I-40. And one that also one of the the big impacts of Helene that we're still trying to wrap our mind around is the fire danger associated with a lot of the timber being down, right? And maidenhair grass or miscanthus, Chinese silvergrass, all of those are kind of talking about the same plant, right? Has a very high flammability rate. And so that's one that, again, it's really worth our time to get a good control on because we know it's just really flammable. And so removing that, especially away from any of your houses and structures, is going to be important too. Yes.
Is the continued sale of invasive species just at the discretion of the retailer?
So that's a good question. So here's what I like to say. As long as people are buying them, the retailer is going to sell them. Now, whether or not that's responsible or not, that's a whole nother conversation. And I would say that most retailers are generally moving away from that because more of, just that their customers and their clientele are becoming educated and they're aware of the impacts that invasive plants have on the environment. And so many people, vote with their dollar and they're not going to purchase plants from a nursery that's offering invasive plants. So that's what I would say to that.
And there's not a larger movement.
But there is like some legislative efforts in other states to kind of address some of that. Not here in North Carolina, but again, I would say that the majority of the nursery industry is moving away from these plants because it's in their economic best interest too. Because again, we vote with our dollars.
And it might be helpful to say something if you find one.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Like, why are you offering this? Yeah. Good point. Okay, so let's move on. All right, let's talk about, as we're trying to wrap our brains around management strategies, control versus eradication, and talking about, again, developing a realistic, objective plan for yourself. With some of these plants, completely eradicating a huge stand of kudzu, like what we saw in the photo previously, is going to take years of effort. There's not going to be a silver bullet approach where I'm going to do this for one growing season and then it's going to go away, right? You're going to find that the common theme of invasive plant management is going to be taking into account how established your population is. True management, again, takes time, and again, a holistic IPM approach of, can I alter the environment in which these invasive plants are in by encouraging native plant fauna, giving them the advantage instead of our invasive plants. I think is something that we can focus on culturally, and we'll talk about that. But what your situation is going to be different than oftentimes your neighbor or someone else in the community. So an approach that they use, you don't necessarily have to take yourself. And that's going to be dependent on your goals. We mentioned your time and your energy that you have to devote to that problem. Okay. So I just want to set that kind of expectation at the forefront. Let's talk about mechanical strategies. We've talked about, again, encouraging native plants to thrive. You can see these photos here. What do you notice about these photos? The forest floor is oftentimes covered in native plant fauna and a healthy ecosystem, right? But in an unhealthy ecosystem, you're not going to see this, right? You're going to see it replaced with other invasives. Okay, so by encouraging our native plants to thrive and not allowing for a foothold to be gained by invasives is going to be important. So, for example, in the aftermath of Helene, if you had land that was eroded, for example, getting something on that piece of property to, again, not allow invasives to get that foothold is going to become important. Plant removal, again, mechanically removing plants is going to be one of the best ways you can remove invasive plants. I know we have actually an example here. Jen, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, if we go out, we can, like,
Yeah.
This is a leaf wrench, it's like the original version. And then he retired and sold his business to his apprentice, so I guess it's now made. We we are not hiding by them in any way, but this is, these tools use leverage to help you pull things out of the ground. As I'm sure Luke will talk more about, a lot of, plants, you need to get all the root material out. If you leave root material in the ground, that plant's just gonna pop right back up. So just cutting everything you see sometimes actually encourages growth. So wanting to, get everything is great, but it is also hard. So this. Goes here, so here's your plant. You put it on the ground and then you're just ease it backwards and then you step on it. And it's a lever. So it's just using physics to help extend your own body strength a little bit. And I think there's different versions, different brands. This is just one that we grabbed for some habitat work we do with students. They can lots of sizes, but it's any tool that helps you get roots out is important.
And as I'm sure many of y'all know, when you're out on your hands and knees and you've got gloves on and you're pulling these things all day, your hands can hurt at the end of that day. And then there's some plants where it's next to impossible to try and of yourself get all of that plant root material out of the ground. So
Poison ivy.
Right.
Alongside it.
Yep, exactly. So using any tool that you have available to you is in our best interest to again make it more manageable. Smother and cover is one of the better strategies that you can use to again tame down or tamp down areas where we have lots of invasives. Again, is this like a perfect long-term form of control? No, but it does allow us to gain a foothold and allow us to come in and manually pull smaller plants instead of larger plants. And really kind of get an area where it's manageable so we can go in and do various forms of treatment. So smother and cover, a great strategy.
That's at the beginning of the growing season.
Yeah, so typically the best time of year would be to do it like when plants are not this tall, right? Okay, so typically earlier in the growing season, the better. I also think too, you can see black plastic is being used for all of these, but you can also kind of do another process called solarization by using clear plastic, which uses the sun's rays to kind of heat the ground to kind of better burn off, I say burn off, but cook that biomass down where it can kind of be on the ground flat and you can go in and pull that a little bit easier, okay? It's all about just trying to make it more manageable. And so smother and cover, obviously what this is doing is depriving it of that sunlight that it needs. So again, clear cover in the summertime in the hottest form of the months, that's gonna work, but don't do clear cover in spring. Because then you're just creating a greenhouse, right? The greenhouse thing. Black cloth is gonna, inhibit that light process. So you're either cooking it or preventing that light from penetrating. Repetitive mowing. This is my Prestigium here. This is actually some of our weed trial work that I've been doing with the university, looking at again timing of various forms of treatment. So we mentioned my Prestigium, mowing it before that seed or as that seed is initializing and preventing it from seeding out in the seed bank is going to be very important. Each plant of Microspecium, just to give you an idea, has like one sprig can produce thousands of vials of seed. Okay, and that seed can last in the seed bank up to 7 years. So you may think, oh, I've got it whipped, right? And then the next year it's coming back up, and you're like, where's it coming from? And it's coming from an established seed bank that's been here. So again, we talked about patience and time needed to manage these. That's going to be a very common thing. Here you can see bamboo. Mowing is a great strategy for bamboo. Most species of bamboo have an apical bud, one apical bud per growing season. And when you make a cut at the beginning of that growing season, that bamboo is done for the rest of the year. If you follow that cut with herbicide treatment or some other form of treatment, that's going to give you a much better strategy in knocking back that bamboo over time. So mowing paired with that treatment is really the best strategy for controlling large populations.
When you say bamboo, are you talking about the native bamboo or the non-native bamboo?
Most bamboo is non-native. Now, there are some bamboo-like plants, river cane. Yeah, so river cane performs a good function in terms of holding in banks and stabilizing banks. You just be mindful again of where you want it, right? Managing populations.
All the big bamboo that you see, river cane is not that.
River,
So
yeah,
if you see anything.
it's like hip.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe a little higher, yeah.
but if you see something that's 10 feet tall, that is not.
I love this picture here. I talk about biologicals as well. Goats is one of the best forms of control with a lot of invasive plants. Some invasives there, it's not their favorite food, but goats will be just about anything. Okay. This is a property, I love this photo. This particular property is here in Asheville. You can see before what it looked like in kudzu, and after 2 years of using goats, this is what it looked like. And they had, I think, about 12 goats on the property. And so they fixed it. They have companies that are actually operating in our area that rent out the goats. And so, it can be a good form of control to kind of tamp that down,
If you take the goats away though, won't they resprout?
Exactly.
Take the roots out.
Right, and so in this area, it's kind of hard to see in this photo, but you can see all the little sprigs of kudzu there. What they did is they came back in with the chemical herbicide treatment, but you try to do a herbicide treatment here, you're not doing anything. You're not getting good exposure to the product. But coming back in with an herbicide here, I was actually just out at this site the other day, and there's not a sprig of kudzu on it. As a result of them year after year managing. This was like a project that took them, I think, in the neighborhood of like 7 or 8 years.
What size of property, what?
This particular lot here was at least a half acre, if I'm not mistaken. But they had other property where it was invested, and they worked with, again, a company that brought out the goats and helped them kind of manage their situation. But another great example of, another form of control. And again, we talked about kudzu bugs. There are other beneficials that can target invasives, but oftentimes, not always, these pests also target other plant material in the landscape. So we kind of have a hard time encouraging them only go after invasive plants, which is why we don't see more just releases of biological pests. Prescribed burning can be a strategy for some invasives, but for others, it actually opens the door very wide for establishment. So prescribed burning, used with caution, and again, it's on a situational basis, because again, it can create more issues if used in the wrong situations. Plant removal, again, feasible for a lot of these pests. If it's in a large enough population, like we showed you that photo of the kudzu, right? Is mechanical removal solely a viable strategy there? Probably not, okay, for again, getting good eradication or control. So it's feasible for only a few kudzu plants in that instance, or like for some plants, it's more feasible if the root system is more shallow, or you can have the tools needed to address that. But you've got to get out all of those root tissue to avoid that resprouting of root pieces left in the soil. A really good example, and I wish I had a sample of it today, is Japanese knotweed along our waterways, especially. Every piece of the underground rhizome of that root tissue can sprout a sprig of Japanese knotweed. So during Helene, we saw a lot of people who had Japanese knotweed that didn't have it before, because it's moving downstream with the water, right? And just a segment of that root tissue, and you're off to the races, right? So monitoring the site for seedlings and root sprouts 1 to 2 years after you think that you've got it whipped is going to be very important. And again, knowing the biology of the plants that you have, for example, microspecium, if you know that it's gonna be there for 7 years, if it's in the seed bank, I need to be monitoring for years afterwards and really staying.
Common name or microspecies?
Japanese steel grass. Yeah. Replanting something else or mulching can also be a really good strategy to again not leave that exposed soil. We talked about that. So let's talk about chemistry for a moment and the importance of safety. So one of my jobs that I do here, as was mentioned, I work with commercial growers, so oftentimes farmers. One of the roles that I have is teaching pesticide safety. So in North Carolina, if you spray pesticides for compensation, you're required to have a pesticide license. And one of the requirements to that pesticide license is attending recertification classes that are not only held at offices like Cooperative Extension, but other businesses and organizations as well. And one of the things we emphasize here is situational assessment of inventorying the surrounding features of your area in which you're trying to treat for whatever it is that you're trying to treat. So wooded areas, residential areas, schools, waterways, all of these are very important to take into account before we would spray anything, right? There are certain products that can't be sprayed within a certain footage of a waterway. And then we have products that are specifically labeled for waterways based on the chemistries and how that product is formulated. Okay, so it just depends on the situation. So think long-term, future planting, future uses for the site. That's going to be important too. Some chemistries have long residual life in the soil, and they're formulated for that purpose, right? So tenacious things, we may want that product to have long-lasting efficacy in the soil. But if you're planning on planting back into that site, we need to be thinking about that from the get-go, right? So again, that's going to be important. Of course, identification of the plant to be treated is going to be critically important because certain products are only going to work for certain plant material, okay? And there's some certain plant material where maybe there's only one chemistry that we're going to recommend to you because the other chemistries just don't have that efficacy that we need, right? And we don't want to waste time, money, or potentially harm the environment, right, by spraying something that we don't need to spray. So again, all of these things and performing this situational assessment inform us of our options that we have available to us. So of course, it's always going to be important anytime that you spray a pesticide to be aware of the PPE that's included on the label. And you may be asking yourself, what's PPE? That's personal protective equipment. Things like gloves, things like wearing a long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes, right? Closed-toed shoes. All of that gear that you need is going to be included specifically on that product label. You can buy it from Lowe's, from Home Depot, from Ace Hardware. Look on that label to see what you need to safely apply the product. So it's going to vary depending on the product, and it minimizes your exposure to that product, which is why it's a label required. These requirements are mandated by the EPA, and the label is the law. So it's always important to follow that label, okay, because it's there for a reason. Again, label is the law. It's also going to include dosage, so things like the rate at which you would apply it, right? So you're not going to go over that rate. And it's helpful to not go under that rate either, because we want that product to work effectively. In fact, in situations where folks aren't using up to that labeled rate for products, we oftentimes see weed resistance to products or herbicides over time. And there are examples of that, and we'll talk about that later. I don't want to go into that, but so dosage, things like instructions, and all the guidance that you need is going to be included on that pesticide label. If you have questions about how to use a product safely, you can always reach out to your local extension office, and we'd be happy to help you as well. So let's look at an example of pesticide label. In this case, this is Roundup. So I want to just highlight some important things really quickly to look for on a pesticide label. Things like the trade name is going to be important to point out, but even more so importantly, especially right now, is the active ingredient. So you can see here, people oftentimes tell me, well, I sprayed Roundup. And that doesn't tell me all the information that I need to know. Because certain Roundup products contain glyphosate, right? But certain Roundup products may contain another chemical, and we'll look at an example of that. PPE requirements, we talked about where to find that. It's going to be very prominent on the first page of the label. And then also general information for how this product works. That's going to contain, again, those pieces of information that's important, like rates, what I can mix in that tank with that chemical, right? And specific application instructions based on, again, your particular situation, okay? And if you have questions about that, you can always reach out to us. All of this is really important though, because we want to minimize those off-target effects. We want to avoid drift on the desirable plants. We want to be mindful of the weather when we're spraying these products. We don't want to spray on a windy day. Certain products may even have a restriction on the label where if it's over 85 degrees, we don't want to spray an herbicide product because it can actually vaporize. There's a term we use in pesticide safety called volatility of a product based on temperature. So all of that label instructions is going to be there for a reason, to again avoid those off-target effects for our health as well as the environment. So let's talk about, again, the differences in chemical products out there briefly. We have contacts, meaning products that only work on above ground portions or the portions where that chemical actually is touching that plant. So you can see here contact herbicides, all of those leaves that are green where that product did not land on those leaves, they're going to remain alive. It's only going to kill the parts of the plant that it touches. Whereas systemic products are going to be taking up in plant tissue and they're going to be translocated both in all of the above ground portions of the plant as well as the below ground, the roots, right? So oftentimes when we're talking about invasive plant control, we're talking about systemics because we're trying to control that root tissue, okay? So that's the reason you may see contacts and systemics at your Lowe's and Ace Hardware, but the reason why we recommend some of the products we do is because they're systemics, okay? So you're going to get really good control. We talked about residual life of treatment. That's going to be important based on your goals. And typically the common products used in invasive management is going to be glyphosate and triclopyr. Those are going to be your two kind of more common chemistries used. There are other options out there. Sometimes you'll see like 2,4-D. Sometimes you'll see Ivasive and some of the others. There are drawbacks and benefits to each product. So as you're trying to kind of formulate a game plan and you're like, man, this is overwhelming. Where do I start? We're going to talk about some of these specific chemistries momentarily, but always reach out to us again if you have questions. Here's an example of products that are not made equally. I talked about the importance of reading the label, right? Here is two products that are used specifically for invasive plant control. In particular, both of these products are used as brush killers, and you would use them, you would cut down invasive plant or shrub that you tree that you want to remove, and you would paint this product onto that stump that you cut, okay? But one has 61% triclopyr and one has 8% triclopyr. You think there's going to be a difference in performance of these products? Yeah, there is, right? So depending on your goals, you may need to select a product that's going to line up with that goal, right? So again, be aware of what you're spraying. We talked about the various formulations of chemistries. Within Roundup, you have ready to use or RTU products where it requires no mix. I'm buying it and it has the one attachment and I'm spraying. That's good for things like lawn weed control, maybe weed control in a mulch bed, something like that. But like Roundup, this particular Roundup product, Roundup 365, I see a lot of people getting in trouble with this. They spray it like a normal Roundup product, but it actually has triclopyr, diquat, some other formulations that if you spray that around your tree's root zone, you're going to see damage in that tree. Whereas if you spray it with glyphosate, that has a shorter residual life, that's not gonna impact the tree as much. Again, if sprayed properly, you're not gonna see damage, but again, you get in situations where if you're not reading the label and you think you're gonna do it the same way I've always done it, and it's something else, you get into trouble. And then look here, so the difference here in the percentage active ingredient, you have 3% Roundup concentration in your yard formulations. This is 41% Roundup or glyphosate, for like stump cut treatments.
Roundup and Triclopyr, are they both systemic?
Both are systemic, yes, good question. And so let's get into kind of some management strategies using chemistries, and really kind of holistically talking about putting it all together, okay? Flush cutting is one of the great strategies we have when treating with a chemical product. Pairing this mechanical form of control with a chemical is going to be really important. Think about like English ivy or kudzu for those that have felt the leaves. What do you notice when you feel the leaves of like English ivy or kudzu? It's waxy, right? That's really important to know. And how effective do you think that herbicide product is at penetrating that plant tissue? It's not going to be real effective. But if we cut those plants and then treat 1 to 2 weeks after making that cut, for certain situations, this is bittersweet here, which we do have plants of here. Bittersweet vine is one that is just a huge challenge across our area. And so I'm gonna pass this around and I want you to feel kind of just how thick and waxy those leaves are. And again, the herbicide if sprayed this kind of year without flush cutting is gonna be not really effective. We can do cut stump treatment, which we'll talk about momentarily, but flush cutting is a really good way to make that plant more susceptible. Window cutting is another strategy to use for your woody vines, your invasive vines, okay, that you may have problems with. So you're gonna make a window of 1 to 2 foot in that vine to cut off all the water and nutrient supply from the base and create an open window on that tree trunk. What we often do is we come back in and we paint herbicide on that bottom portion to again get systemic treatment down where we want it, right in the roots. Okay, so oftentimes it's paired with cut stump treatments. And then for those that are wondering what cut stump treatments look like, this is an example. This particular example, we were doing a study where we were looking at getting really good coverage. So we mixed a food dye in with this product to see where we got coverage. And certain products already have dyes in them, so you can see that coverage that you're getting with that product. Usually it's going to be very important when you're doing cut stump treatments to follow, like as soon as you cut it, follow it up with that herbicide application. If you wait too long, even at 24 hours, that plant starts to seal itself off, and that efficacy of that product just is degraded. So
Like minutes for something, like the sooner the better.
yes, the sooner the better. So immediately after cutting, let's go ahead and get that product.
Okay, I'm confused, and what's the flush cutting comparing to that? You're
Flush
saying
cutting
flush
is
cutting-
foliage, like applying a product to the foliage,
Oh, okay,
right?
not
If that's
cutting
what
it.
you, yes, but cut stump is completely removing that plant, and then we're going back in and we're painting that herbicide.
So you would do the flush, like when it's just coming out in the spring?
Correct. Yep. Or if you're trying to get foliage treatment in the summertime, after that initial flush, and you're like, shoot, I missed my optimal time to spray, I can go back in and I can cut and get that new proliferation growth. It's gonna be more susceptible over time. Typically too, remember how I was just talking about the difference in the concentrations of herbicide products. If we're making a cut stump treatment, it's going to be very important that we're using not that lawn killer that has a lower concentration, like 8% concentration. Typically, most of your cut stump products are going to have 41% or higher. Okay, and that's because we need a higher concentration to get that penetration into the root tissue via the vascular system that's present in that stump. Okay,
Fall the best time because the plants are starting to pull
Exactly.
down the roots anyway.
exactly. That was my next point. Fall is generally the best time of year to do invasive cut stump treatments. Because again, what are most plants doing this time of year, especially if they're deciduous, but also our evergreen plant friends do this too, where they're pulling sugars down into their root system as they're going dormant. And our herbicide products can hitch a ride with those sugars down to the root tissue and get really good control of it.
What tree is that?
This particular tree is actually, this was for privet, believe it or not.
Oh,
wow. So it was one of the biggest privet specimens I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. So-
For those that wanted to cut stump, can you share a little bit more about like how to apply? Are you literally like buying paintbrushes, like I've seen shoe polish bottles, like what are some methods that you'd recommend for folks?
That's a really good question. So some products, when you buy them at the store, will have like a sponge or wet applicator. And then you can also buy those applicator products on Amazon or at another retailer. And actually attach it to like a spray bottle, to get really good. It basically just soaks a sponge or a wick, and you, with gloves, obviously, you wear the appropriate PPE, but you're just painting, daubing on that product. And again, having enough product where it's continuously wicking onto that sponge is kind of how most applicator systems work. You'll see some professional situations where you can have backpack implements that have wick applicators. So if you're making like a bunch of, daub applications, there are backpack systems that have wick applicators. But that's generally what I would recommend. You can buy brushes and try to do it that way, but oftentimes it's just messy and results in a lot of off-target sprays. Okay, so I really like the wick applicators. And if you look on Amazon, you can look up wick applicators, and we can get some resources to you if you're interested in that as well. Basal bark method is going to be really important. I know Jen had mentioned certain plants when we cut them at the base, think like tree of heaven. That's actually the exact opposite of what we want, right? Because tree of heaven, if you cut the base of tree of heaven, as an example, tree of heaven, which is here, is a tree that can oftentimes get up to 6, sometimes 10 inches in diameter. I mean, it can really get some size. And when you cut a tree of heaven, there are these auxiliary buds along the inside tissue of that stump. And what you do is when you cut that off, you're just basically cutting the head off the snake and creating 50 more where there was one. Okay.
So what do you do?
So that's what you do. This is a great question. If you have a tree of heaven that's 3 inches in diameter or less, okay, you will do basal bark sprays. Okay, so I'm just applying a band of herbicide along the bottom foot of that tree. Okay, I'm spraying to the point where that bark is wet, but I don't want it to like puddle at the base of the tree. Okay, I'm just getting good effective coverage on that bottom foot. If it is more than 3 inches in diameter, I'm actually going to make hack cuts at a 45-degree angle all the way around, okay, the circumference of that tree. And then I'm going to be squirting that concentrated herbicide in those cuts. But I'm not completely cutting that specimen. Okay, that's going to be really important. And oftentimes with tree of heaven, what cutting it does, we talked about sprouting from the base, but it also sprouts from all of that root tissue that's present in the soil. So you'll see tree of heaven pop up 10, 15 foot away from that cut stump. So it's really important.
I've done it both ways.
Yes, yeah,
I did it the wrong way and it suffered.
it creates so much more
But then I
problems.
learned this from you and I made my little cuts on the side
Yeah,
and it did not suffer.
yes.
When you say cut on the side, can you like give us a visual?
Here's a visual right here, hack and squirt. This is what I've used. The Forest Service uses hack and squirt. This is what they do. They don't have time to go in and physically cut everything. They actually have backpack sprayers where that blade actually has a wick along the edge of that blade. And so when they make an application, it's dosed every time they make a cut. So they've gotten really efficient. There is no cut and then I'm gonna be spraying with something else. It's one cut and you're done kind of thing. But again, this is that hack and squirt method. Fall's gonna be the best time of year for that as well.
You were just saying hundreds, so it could be any of those?
These are typically what's used in the hack and squirt method, but I would get less caught up in that and focus on again IDing the plan in question to again figure out what options are available to you. I want to get to the actual plants here. I want to make sure we don't foliar method, spraying again when actively growing. Young growth is going to be best because again, they're not developing that waxy cuticle like they do later in the growing season, right? Good coverage is going to be critical, but we need to be mindful of drift. He's standing in a sea of kudzu here, but you'll notice there's trees in the background too, and he's spraying over this kudzu. It's going to be next to impossible not to get drift onto those trees. So I really recommend using goats or mowing to try and get it down to a manageable level where you're minimizing any of those off-target effects, okay? So that's going to be really important. Surfactants may be needed. You may think, well, what's a surfactant? Surfactants are actually another product that you can add in your tank, in your backpack sprayer. And effectively how they work, when an herbicide is sprayed on the surface of a leaf, think about like a water droplet. It stays in that sphere. It wants to stay in that sphere. Surfactants break the polarity of that product where it spreads out more evenly. More of that product is making contact with that, thereby increasing absorption of that product.
Is that what diesel does?
Yes, and certain products have petroleum in the product because of that very reason. It helps with the penetration. Typically, most of your petroleum-based products are going to be cut stump. You're not spraying with a petroleum product. You're usually cut stump treatments with that. Let's get into, I'm going to hurry through here because I want to save time for especially looking at plants. Let's look at some notorious invasives for our area. Let's start with Bradford pear. Bradford pear, again, we talked about introducing the ornamental trade. Here's the fruit there. You may see the fruit, you may not, depending on, again, the environment in which your Bradford's in. But Bradford or Cowrie pear is going to be really tenacious, and you'll see it along roadways. Look at those spikes along.
It's thorny.
Super thorny. And this was actually taken just outside here, along the side of the road. We're very excited here in Buncombe County. We have our first ever Bradford pear bounty program that we actually just closed. Yeah. And so as part of this bounty program, up to 5 Bradford pears, if you provided proof and registered ahead of time, you provide proof that you can cut down the Bradford pear, so before and after photos, you're given a free native tree replacement, and they're 3-gallon trees. So they're going to be like 3 to 4 foot tall trees. Native tree species, we're actually just getting ready to do the distribution event on October 4th, and we hope that, again, this is going to be an annual thing. So if you didn't get in the program this year, come back next year. We're planning on having it again. It's a big success, and we're going to give away over 250 trees as part of this program in the pilot year. So we're really excited about it. But again, we're targeting this because of its displacement of native vegetation. Be mindful of suckers when you're cutting out these trees. So repeated application of herbicide products may be needed, okay? So again, you want to apply that herbicide product as soon as you cut that Bradford pear. And I talked about the Bradford pear bounty program. You can go on our website for the details of that. I'm going to be moving a little quickly here, but I'm going to give you some resources, so don't feel like I have to write all this stuff down, okay? Tree of Heaven, we talked about this. Tree of Heaven is one that is going to have a compound leaf I always tell folks, if you think like, oh, do I have a tree of heaven? Do I have a black walnut? Do I have a sumac? One of the characteristic ways that you can identify a tree of heaven, breaking off the leaves and take a smell. Oh, see, what does it smell like to you?
Yeah.
Over there.
That's bad.
What do you smell? What does it smell
Sadly, I don't know.
like? Salad?
Yeah.
I always think it smells like peanut butter. Like,
It's weird.
Kid you not. pass it around. If you like to smell it, smell it.
Don't like stick up your nose.
Yeah, don't stick it up your nose, but yeah. Yeah, take a sniff.
Like raw.
It has these cannibal flowers.
And then it has this like knobs on this.
Yep, and that's a great point on the leaves. Look at the bottom of the leaves, they're gonna have these nodules that kind of crook out at the bottom. That's gonna be different than like your sumac, it's gonna be different than your black walnut, okay? In addition to the smell, which is just super characteristic, it smells like.
Yes, they do.
Usually, most leaves will have the nodules, yeah. And this is what the fruit looks like, it's a samara-like fruit. So, tree of heaven, or, yeah, that's gonna be again, you're not gonna do cut stump treatment, we talked about that, that's gonna create issues. So again, 3 inches in diameter above, hack and squirt method is best. You want 1 cut per 1 inch of the trunk, okay, so you're gonna need to make multiple cuts if it's gonna be a larger tree that's we're treating, okay? If below 3 inches in diameter, again, the basil spray or foliage spray is best, but look at all these suckers that can result if you do cut stump treatment. So again,
The systemic isn't enough to get all that distance, is that the problem?
well, the systemic is gonna work as quickly. It doesn't work quickly. Literally, the tree of heaven will just sprout before, you know, that product has time to get to all of that root system.
Okay, so if we have babies, you're saying spray them.
Spray them,
Don't cut.
don't,
spray them.
yes, exactly, don't make that cut.
I will be doing that.
Yep. Japanese knotweed,
Oh, I hate
this is
that.
one I don't have a sample of, but looks almost like bamboo to me. I have people that kind of make that comparison. That's what the stems look like, kind of a pinkish green stem that has spotted lenticels on the stem itself. And those stems are going to be importantly hollow. And they're going to have that nodal band similar to a bamboo, but different. And then colonized oftentimes in big colonies, like 15 to 30 foot wide. They can be as tall as me. I've seen them taller than me actually. And they can just really take root with any of those underground rhizomes. It can move this plant quickly. Typically for Japanese knotweed, you can see here it along the waterway here, a pre-herbicide cut generally in June is what we're going to do. So we're going to mow it down in June, but we're going to wait 2 months, okay? Let it flush back before we spray. Kind of different than some of the other invasive plant control methods that we have. So we're going to follow that up with our first cut in June, then we're going to spray in August and September this time of year. And it's going to take, again, repeated cycles of us doing this year after year to get good control. Importantly, when you see plants in this situation, remember how I talked about using the right product. It has to be an aquatic formulated product if we're spraying near a waterway. Okay, so that's going to be really important. So in terms of glyphosate, there are aquatic herbicides, rodeo, aquanid are some of the examples of those products that are formulated for that specific purpose. Okay, I'm going to be moving quick, but I'll save some time for questions at the end. And as I talk about these plants, Jen and Rose can kind of be my Vannas and show off here. So multipolar rose, this is one of those plants, as you can see, it's hard to even handle with the amount of thorns on it. Multipolar rose was originally brought here as a living hedge to keep cattle and to prevent erosion along riverbeds. Okay, so it works really great at that, but it also roots everywhere it touches the ground. Those stems touch the ground with roots, and it's just a very tenacious plants, so triclopyr glyphosate applications typically, in addition to those mechanical applications of pulling and removing individual plants mechanically, that's always a viable option. But if you have multiple plants for a large plant, typically herbicide applications need to be incorporated in that management plan, okay? So cut stump treatment is typically the best method. Foliar methods can work on smaller shrubs, but it's important to get really good coverage, and when they're so thick, I really recommend just cut stump treatment, really is the primary way of controlling flora rows. Chinese privet, we have that right here, yeah. So kind of nondescript, but they usually have evergreen foliage, both Chinese privet and Japanese privet. And one of the main characteristics, ivy features that Jen's passing around is the fruit. It has these black drupe-like fruits that are really, they're born on the plant this time of year. They also have these white flower clusters that are going to be blooming in the spring that are really kind of fragrant, and they're not a good fragrance either. You'll kind of notice it in the springtime when they're blooming. And so with this particular plant, it was introduced in the ornamental trade. Cut stump treatments is typically what's best. Timing is typically late fall or early winter for that cut stump treatments. And again, we're typically using glyphosate or triclopyr for that as well. Look at this root tissue though. I mean, those roots can spread out far and wide, which is again, when we talk about mechanical forms of treatment, that's always an option. But we really need to focus on getting as much of that root tissue as possible, okay? So that's why oftentimes herbicide treatments are recommended.
If you can't get to it all, is it harmful to just kind of chop them for now, just to kind of slow them down, or does that make it worse?
Well, chopping, you know, it'll be able to grow from that chopped root tissue.
Right.
Some certain invasive plants.
So you just keep from getting like bigger, if you really
And
just can't get to it for.
Yes, and so no,
When they're fruiting, at least.
Yeah. right, yeah, removing it the best you can. Do the best you can, that's all we can do, right? And so, you know, tamping it down the best you can mechanically is always a good option. Oriental bittersweet, we talked about that one earlier.
The trees.
I actually have a really good sample here with the fruit. The fruit is one of the most characteristic forms of IV here. It's really brightly colored, this red fruit, and it has these heart-shaped leaves that are usually minutely serrated along the margins. So it's going to have some serrations along the margins, and this bright red fruit. And then the flowers are kind of nondescript in the spring, so not really a great ID feature, but that fruit is. Look at how thick these bittersweet vines can be, and they can take down a tulip poplar, 100-foot tulip poplar easily. If you let them get enough size. We talked about window cutting. This is an ideal candidate for window cutting, making that 1 to 2 foot section of treatment there. Foliar application after cut flush. We talked about cut flush. If you're going to do a foliar application, is being the best form of control. Typically, if it's after 8 weeks being emerged, after 8 weeks, you're going to need to do a cut flush treatment if you're going to do a foliar application. Cut stump and window cutting, you can do that anytime, but again, the fall is generally going to be the best time of year. And repeated applications are more than likely going to be needed, unfortunately. Kudzu, that has this characteristic trifoliate leaf, right? It's going to be fuzzy to the feel, okay? And it has these characteristic legume flowers that are actually really pretty when they bloom. But again, obviously, Brochure is ornamental. Brochure, honestly, as a means of controlling erosion. Again, nutritionally too, for animals, it actually has a high protein content similar to alfalfa. So in some Asian countries, they actually grow it for livestock use, where the kudzu bug is prevalent and it's just a crop, a cultivated crop. But obviously we don't have those natural pests here. And here's an example of those tubers.
Geez.
Okay, because
Geez.
this is a really cool group here in Nashville. I can't remember their name actually. Yes, kudzu culture. And they go around to different properties and they focus on mechanically removing these tubers. Even with the assistance of herbicide, with a tuber this large, it's gonna take years of repeated management efforts. And so by going in and removing these tubers completely, that is allowing property owners to kind of turn the tide in their favor. And so I can't say enough about groups like this that go out in their community and focus on public lands and private lands alike and are really doing their community a service.
If you're interested in that, so you can ask us if you wanna volunteer outside of your own land. We'll
Absolutely.
point you in the direction of some groups.
Absolutely. And such a fun group to work with, I promise.
They make jelly and baskets, all
yeah.
kinds of stuff.
It's a lot.
Is that Alan Huskat?
I think I don't know if that's Alan or not.
What's Alan?
It may be Alan, it may be
Yeah,
Alan.
that's him.
So flush cut, and treat is useful, but again, if you have just a wide area that you're trying to treat, just a good foliar application is not gonna cut it. You're gonna need to get that foliage down to a manageable level, but if you have to spray when it's young or actively growing, because again, we talked about that waxy cuticle. So goats is one, again, the primary sources of managing that. Microspecium, we can pass this around so folks can see it. It has this characteristic kind of silver stripe down most of its leaves. When it's young, it doesn't. When it's young, it doesn't always have that. But when it's established and stands like this, you're gonna see it. Microspecium is one of those plants, Japanese stiltgrass, that will grow in sunny spots. It will grow in shady spots. It will grow in dry spots, wet spots. It doesn't care. It will grow wherever that seed is deposited, it will grow. And water can move it around, and again, during Helene, this is one that we're really concerned about in terms of the spread, okay? So what can we do? Primarily glyphosate, glufosinate, and there's some other chemistries that can be used while actively growing, but you have to spray and you need to treat before it goes to seed.
And when is that again, you said?
Typically, it goes to seed around August and September, but we need to do mowing or chemical applications before that time.
So
Before. So you need to kind of time it in July, in late July, so that's gonna ensure the flowers will have already initialized. And why is that important? If I spray in May before the flowers have initialized, I'm gonna knock it back, but it's gonna come right back with its flower structures. If I do my treatment after the flowers are on the plant and I mow it, it's not gonna have flowers that year, okay? Because it's already put flowers on it once. So I knocked it back, it's not gonna have seeds that year. Then I can follow it up with a herbicide treatment, and more importantly, I've made sure there are no seeds entering that seed. Okay, yes,
Are there natives that look similar?
yes, there are several natives that are lookalikes. A lot of our grasses, native woodland grasses, can have a similar look to that. I've honestly seen, I don't know if Rose and Jen, you mentioned, the bamboo lookalike.
The smart weed.
Yeah, smart weed.
Deer tongue.
Deer tongue, yeah. Yes, there are other lookalikes out there,
I was
but
just gonna mention, Luke, that this is one that is actually shallow root system, it's easier
yes,
for
it's
mechanical.
cool. Yes,
So we have this, like, that's one that's an easier mechanical, and just mentioned too, in case you weren't going to, that it's important to bag this stuff too, especially
Yes.
if you've got seed. I learned this the hard way, cause I don't like putting a bunch of plant material in the plastic bags, right, and I like composted it or left it, you know, where it was, and you've got to like take it and bag it and throw it in the trash.
and importantly too, if you're gonna mechanically pull microspecium, you need to do it before the seed is ripe. Okay, get it? Because if you pull it with that seed ripe, it's just going everywhere, spread it, yeah, you spread it.
Is there a pre-emergent? I think I had read online at some website, they were saying to buy a pre-emergent.
Some pre-emergents can work, most of your pre-emergents that you would use for like your grasses would work on this. But where you see this oftentimes is in a woodland setting where I want that native flora and fauna to germinate and grow, so I don't really wanna use a pre-emergent. I just
But
need
what
to
if it
target that,
literally took over an area?
then you can use a
That-
pre-emergent.
Okay.
Yeah, that's always an option, and I'm happy to talk to you about that too.
So we're too late to hand pull now, and probably.
If you hand pull now, you risk against spreading that seed now.
And what's the distinguishing identifier on it that would make sure I'm not accidentally pulling with a native grass?
So again, those silver stripes that we talked about, kind of in that mid vein. And so again, also the length and width of the blade, the leaf blade. We talked about deer tongue and some of the others, they're gonna be much wider, and this is more narrow, okay? And there are some really good diagnostic guides. I actually wrote a fact sheet about Japanese silkgrass, and it's been published this year, so go on our website, there's some really good information there. And take a look at that sample that's been passed around too.
Does it have a purple flower?
Not a purple flower, it's actually kind of nondescript, kind of greenish, doesn't really stand out. But it's just gonna be kind of cylindrical, and it just sheds seed at a touch. Even the wind, it can spread. Iliagnus, this is one that's similar to calorie pear. Look at those thorns. I've had growers, farmers puncture tires actually on Iliagnus. But one of the key identifiers is gonna have this silvery leaf, both on the undersides and on top of the leaf itself. And it's speckled, it'll shimmer kind of in the sun. And it has this characteristic fruit on it as well, this red fruit this time of year. Cut stump treatment, basil spray can be applied in early fall. Again, if you can get it actually at a younger age where it doesn't have as much size, you can use those mechanical pullers to get some good action on that. That's always an option. Foliar treatments, if you need to do that, I would really honestly do cut stump if it's a big specimen, but if it's small, spray coverage, if you can get 50% coverage, you're gonna start seeing some action in that product, but you have to get at least 50% coverage to get good control. Golden bamboo, or just in general, some of our cultivated bamboos. We see golden bamboo a lot, especially in South Asheville. Mowing is critical. Again, we talked about all bamboo has one apical growing point a year. So repeated mowing, bamboo cannot tolerate it, and it's gonna take years of repeated mowing. You have to stay after it. But look at these underground rhizomes that can happen. So I've seen situations where neighbors have bamboo literally 100 feet away from a property line, and there's bamboo popping up in that neighbor's yard. So again, very important that mowing is done frequently. Glyphosate and triclopyr can be applied on new shoots in early spring. It's gonna take repeated applications though, year after year. I've seen excavation as a last resort to get rid of large stands of bamboo. It's that serious. Euonymus, or burning bush, we actually have a sample back here as well. You can see why it gets the name. Oh, look, we've got bittersweet growing on it too. You can see why it's called burning bush, right? It has this characteristic fall color. I used to say burning bush is it used to be very common in the ornamental industry. And if you went to a McDonald's or a Burger King, more than likely it was going to be in the parking lot. Okay, it was the characteristic fast food ornamental plant. You can see what it looked like here in the understory of the woods, right? This time of year, you're gonna see that in some of our woodland settings, which is really frustrating to see. One of the important ID characteristics as you're passing it around, pay attention to the stem. It has the wing-like, it has cork growth on the stem that feels like wings almost. So you can see it here in this picture, a really good picture there, and the fruit that's born also right before that fall color and those red drupes as well. Glyphosate or triclopyr is typically what's used in a stump cut treatment. But again, mechanical form of control, if you can get it early enough, at an early stage is gonna be really good strategy, for this one as well, okay? And I'm not gonna be able to cover everything, right? There's so many other invasive plants that we can talk about, and a lot of these, we have fact sheets online.
Okay.
So let's, talk about resources, let's start a conversation and share that with you on an as needed basis, and you can peruse this on your own time as well. But princess tree, spirea, English ivy, honeysuckle, wisteria, we talked about miscanthus earlier, but I didn't have time to have a slide on it, right? Barberry, nandina, vinca, winter creeper, all of these are examples of other invasives, and there's so many others out there too. So again, I hope this talk has given you some tools for your toolbox, and maybe has helped you prepare as you game plan holistically about trying to form a game plan. Okay, get a start when it comes to these invasive plants. Some of these resources are going to be extremely helpful to you. If you take a picture of any slide today, I would encourage you to take a picture of this one, okay? As well as knowing our phone number. Call us if you have questions. We're always here to help.
Can we
That's what
send
we're
you
here
an
for.
email?
Yes, you can send me an email.
Okay.
Yep, and I'm about to put on a slide that's got my contact information as well. So please feel free to reach out to me or others in the office, and we're gonna make sure we get you help. I know I'm gonna be over here, but for folks that would like to stick around, I did have a page pulled up of some of these resources so we could look at them together.
So feel
This-
free if you're on a tight timeline.
If you're on a
wherever
tight
that
timeline,
is,
you can
go
leave.
ahead and go.
For those that joined us online, I really appreciate that you came today, and hopefully you found this helpful. Please feel free to reach out. I know this is small, but this is the Extension Master Gardener Plant Toolbox. What I like about it, it has so many uses, but if I want to learn more about how to ID bittersweet, for example, all I have to do is type in bittersweet, and it pulls up bittersweet, but look at all this information that I get. I know exactly the biology of that plant. I have all of these pictures that I can use to identify bittersweet. And so for those more nuanced invasives that we talked about today, if you want to learn more about them, I would highly encourage you to use this resource. And what I also like about this tool, if we go back to the beginning here, if I want to, let's say, find a plant, I love this find a plant tool. If you are trying to find plants for your particular setting in your garden or landscape, say I'm interested in a native garden in a sunny spot where it gets a tremendous amount of moisture. All of these criteria on the left can be checked, and I get generated a list of plants available to me in the ornamental tray that I can plant for that spot. Okay, it's a really cool tool. And I don't have time to demo it right now, but like literally, you can say I'm from the mountains of Western North Carolina, and it's going to narrow it down that much. And it's not a comprehensive or an exhaustive database, but it's getting better year after year as we're adding plants to this database. So I would highly encourage you to play around with that tool. We also talked about the EDD maps for early detection and distribution maps. I really like this, especially for our invasive pests and insects. You can see where some of these plants have been reported. Insects like the spotted lanternfly that have tight associations with tree of heaven, for example, we're tracking in the state of North Carolina. If you're interested in a pest and where it's been spotted and located, this is a really good resource to see that information. And I think those are the two things that I wanted to cover. Are there any questions? And I can talk with you one-on-one too afterwards as well. Hopefully you got something out of it. Yes.
I was interested to hear about the kudzu culture, and I think most of us encounter these invasives mostly on other people's property or on public property. And what are our resources for that? I mean, not necessarily us doing it, but volunteer organizations or something like that?
So reaching out, we can put you in contact with some of those volunteer organizations. Where you could be put on like a wait list, or I'm interested in working with this particular volunteer organization. As far as like your neighbors, I wish I could say that there was some extra resources there, but oftentimes it boils down to having a good relationship with that neighbor. And oftentimes what I tell folks that are having difficulties with, you know, maybe a neighbor not understanding the ramifications of that invasive plant, is just maybe sending them a website link or a fact sheet and say, look, it's not that I'm trying to tell you what to do. I'm trying to come from this perspective of I care about the ecosystem and our environment. I don't want to displace all this other vegetation, and you know, maybe try that approach. I wish there was something else like clear cut that I could give you, but there's not really a silver bullet there.
My
Well, if
question,
I can add, that there's a few organizations, I don't know now, Post-Helene, what their priorities are, but they used to regularly run sort of invasive plant volunteer days, like removal days, are Mountain True, River Link, and Conserving Carolina. If you're interested in looking into that, in addition to the kudzu one that they shared. Mountain True also has this like little native plant guide that has invasives and like replacements that you might want to consider. And that could be like maybe a nice neighbor conversation starter too. That you can say, hey, here are 3 other beautiful vines that you could plant that will grow in a similar habitat as Oriental bittersweet, or you know, whatever it may be, rather than like it's evil, you know, cut it down, right? You don't want to get this philosophical debate. But maybe something like this.
Where did you get that from?
You have to go to Mountain Tier's website. I could send you it. Like they don't just like hand them out at table like this. But you're welcome to take a picture. We had a great relationship with the guy there for years, and he gave me 2 of them. So I'll do anything. You got one. Very special.
That is also a compelling argument.
You're welcome to. I'll put this up here.
A lot of the vine, kudzu, bittersweet, porcelain vine, a lot of the ones that climb up trees to, when you're talking to a neighbor, all of those things are fireworkers. So they can easily bring ground fire to the canopy. And so if all else fails, that is a very compelling and very realistic.
Not to mention compromising the integrity of the tree,
Right.
causing
It's
potential
more-
damage to not only your property, but their property as well.
And I think natural disasters have shown us that like a lot of these native plants are good replacements for all kinds of reasons, or
Exactly.
for us as well as the ecosystem as a whole, right?
Yes.
What's the deal with Nandina outside of base? I've never seen.
So Nandina is spread often by like wildlife, so birds can ingest it and then spread it. And so it kind of spreads similarly, I would say, to like a moss.
It's also toxic.
It's also toxic.
And
Yeah.
so it is ornamental, and then it kills a lot of it. The berries are very attractive, and birds can gorge themselves on it, and then have.
And there's been lots of dead birds just filled with Nandina.
Bills. Wow. So it's was that on that list that you had put?
Yeah, Nandina, I think it's on that.
It is very common, like,
Yes.
It's very
1
common.
in 10 houses in my neighborhood has
Yeah.
Nandina. I wanna like hang up this.
We are 10 minutes over, and I want to
Yeah.
respect everybody's time and the folks
Please,
online.
feel free.
If you could put your.
Oh, yeah,
contact
yeah, let me-
info up,
Yeah,
so
let me-
that folks can reach out to you. And then the last announcement of the night is an exciting one. Grab one of the next. Seeds.
Seeds to share.
So we, this is a partnership between Buncombe County Soil and Water and Extension, funded by Mountain True. We're giving away 1,000 bags of seed, in Buncombe County to help with revegetation efforts. So when you are pulling stuff and you need to reseed to keep invasive coming back up, this is a great option. Each bag has enough seed to cover about 200 square feet. So, you know, We have two seed mixes. One is a riparian mix. Both come from Ernst Conservation Seed Company.
All the information is on the QR code. It takes you to what all the species in there, as well as planting instructions.
There's a couple
Are they
of them.
generally sun or shade or?
These are more sun, but they can do shade. There's some of the stuff in here will be shade tolerant as well. There's like 24 species in both bags, so it's kind of a shotgun effect.
And this is the upland meadow, so this would be like a sunnier, like if your tree fell down and you got like a big open spot or landslides, please be careful. That kind of thing would be upland meadow. Riparian, of course, is by the waterways. So or moist areas.
Talking out within like 10 feet, 15 feet, 30 feet.
Ideally, you want to be a couple, like 2 feet. You
Yeah.
know?
Ideally, and I kind of think of the riparian corridor as being like that 10 to 15 feet. And generally, it's those plants that like that moisture and can stabilize those banks.
And that is why we wanted to really bring this to the county, is to help with bank stabilization and water quality. So, Everett, please take one on your way out. Decide if you have more of a period or a dry site need. And then you can get all your information here. So we are.
Be the first to get these.
You will be the very today. So you are the first folks to get these will be available with the master gardeners. So if you tell your friends, master gardeners will have these available during their office hours.
Their helpline out.
Their helpline hours. We're gonna be getting them out to libraries. I'm gonna try and get them out to some of the 1-year events this weekend. So, but over the next, couple of months, look at the master gardeners and libraries to get some seeds and help local.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.